What if I told you that two children could vanish from their home, leave behind concrete evidence, and investigators would deliberately choose not to use every tool available to find them? Have you ever trusted that authorities would move heaven and earth for your missing child? Have you ever assumed that when tragedy strikes, the system works, that protocols exist to protect the innocent? The Sullivan case is about to shatter every assumption you've ever had about missing children investigations. Picture this: May 2nd, 2025. A quiet morning in rural Nova Scotia. Two children, 6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan, are playing in their family home, surrounded by the safety of familiar walls. By 10 a.m., they're gone, vanished, without a trace. But here's what makes this case absolutely infuriating. It's not just about what happened to these children, it's about what the investigators chose not to do. The tools they refused to use, the evidence they deliberately withheld, the decisions that may have cost precious time when every second mattered. The Sullivan case exposes a chilling reality. Sometimes the very people sworn to protect us make decisions that could cost lives. And today, I'm going to reveal 4 devastating secrets that investigators hoped you'd never discover. Secrets that will change how you view missing children cases forever. Secrets that every parent, every community member, every person who believes in justice needs to know. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this case represents everything wrong with modern investigations, and what you need to know to protect your own family. If this story already has you questioning everything you thought you knew about missing children investigations, hit that like button and let me know in the comments, because what I'm about to reveal will shake you to your core. This isn't just another true crime story. This is a masterclass in how institutional failures, media manipulation, and bureaucratic arrogance can turn a rescue mission into a cover-up. This case will teach you that blind trust in authority can be deadly, and I'll show you exactly what questions every parent needs to ask. The truth about Lilly and Jack Sullivan isn't just hidden, it's been deliberately buried under layers of procedure, politics, and public relations. But today we're digging it up. Are you ready to discover what they don't want you to know? Let me paint you a picture of where this nightmare began. Lansdowne Station, Pictou County, Nova Scotia. If you've never been to rural Nova Scotia, imagine the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where children can play outside without fear, where the biggest worry is whether the Wi-Fi signal reaches the back bedroom. This isn't downtown Toronto or Vancouver. This is countryside Canada, rolling hills, dense forests that stretch for miles, and the kind of isolation that city folks dream about for vacation. But isolation becomes terrifying when children disappear. The Sullivan family home sits against this backdrop of vast wilderness. Thousands of acres of forest where a child could vanish in minutes, where evidence could be swallowed by terrain so thick that even experienced hikers get lost. On that fateful morning, the home belonged to Malaya Brooks Murray and her partner Daniel Martel. Malaya's children, 6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack, were in their care. These weren't just statistics waiting to become a news story. Lilly was a bright, curious girl who loved her blanket and never went anywhere without it. Jack, just 4 years old, was the kind of kid who left bootprints everywhere he went, always exploring, always moving. But here's something crucial that makes this case even more heartbreaking. There were signs that at least one of the children might have been neurodivergent. In case you don't know, that means they might have had autism, ADHD, or other conditions that could make them more vulnerable, more likely to wander, less able to respond to calls for help. Remember that detail. It becomes important when we talk about how investigators handled this case. The morning started like any other. Routine breakfast, the kids playing, normal family life. But by 10 a.m., something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The children were nowhere to be found. Malaya made the call that every parent prays they'll never have to make. My children are missing. Now, here's where you might expect the story to follow a familiar pattern. Immediate response. All hands on deck. Every resource mobilized. The community rallying to bring these babies home. And you know what? The community did rally. Within hours, neighbors were forming search parties. Volunteers were combing the woods. People were dropping everything to help find Lilly and Jack. But the official response? That's where our first secret begins to emerge. Because while volunteers were searching frantically, investigators were making decisions that would haunt this case forever. Decisions that prioritized procedure over urgency, protocol over common sense, politics over the lives of two vulnerable children. The first pieces of evidence emerged quickly, and they should have been game changers. A fragment of Lily's beloved blanket was found on Lansdowne Road, not far from the family home. A small boot print, believed to be Jack's, was discovered along an old pipeline trail. These weren't random clues. These were concrete evidence that the children had been in specific locations, reach rooms that could lead to answers. But instead of treating these discoveries as urgent leads that demanded immediate action, investigators made choices that still baffle experts today. Choices that may have cost precious time in those critical first hours when rescue was still possible. The dense wilderness of Nova Scotia had swallowed two innocent children. The community was mobilized. Evidence was emerging. The clock was ticking. But what happened in those first crucial hours would expose 4 devastating secrets that investigators hoped you'd never discover. Here's the first secret that investigators don't want you to know, and it's going to make your blood boil. When 6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan vanished on May 2, 2025, investigators made a decision that could have been the difference between life and death. They chose not to issue an Amber Alert. Let me explain why this is absolutely devastating. An Amber Alert isn't just a notification, it's a nuclear option for missing children. When that alert hits every phone, every radio, every TV screen in the province, millions of people become your search team. Every driver becomes a potential witness. Every citizen becomes a guardian, watching for those children. In Canada, Amber Alerts are reserved for specific circumstances: a child under 18, believed to have been abducted, immediate danger, and sufficient description to help the public identify the child or suspect. These criteria exist for good reason. You can't cry wolf with emergency alerts. But here's what makes the RCMP's decisions so infuriating. They had vulnerable children, concrete evidence of their movement, and a situation that screamed immediate danger. Instead of an Amber Alert, they issued a Vulnerable Persons Alert. Sounds official, right? But here's what they don't tell you. Vulnerable Persons Alerts don't have the same reach, the same urgency, the same power to mobilize the public. The first alert went out at 12:43 p.m., more than 2 hours after the children were reported missing. 2 hours. In missing children cases, the first few hours are everything. The second alert, that didn't go out until 5:26 p.m. the next day. Let me put this in perspective. While investigators were debating criteria and following procedure, Lilly and Jack were somewhere out there, maybe lost in the woods, maybe taken by someone with terrible intentions, maybe hurt and calling for help that would never come, because not enough people were looking. But wait, it gets worse. Remember I mentioned concrete evidence? Lily's blanket fragment and Jack's boot print. This physical evidence proved the children had moved beyond their home. It suggested they were either taken or had wandered far enough to leave traces in locations that demanded immediate investigation. But investigators refused to release details about this evidence to the public. Think about that for a moment. They had proof that the children had been in specific locations, with specific items, but they kept that information secret. Why? They claimed it was to protect the integrity of the investigation. Here's what child safety experts say about that excuse. It's garbage. Dr. Sarah Chen, a child safety specialist who's worked on dozens of missing children cases, put it bluntly: when children are missing, public transparency saves lives. Every detail you share is a potential lead. Every witness you reach could be the one who brings them home. But the RCMP held back. They kept the details of Lily's blanket secret, its pattern, its condition, exactly where it was found. They refused to describe the unique characteristics of Jack's boot print, details that could have helped identify his specific shoes or the direction he was traveling. Imagine if that information had been broadcast immediately. Imagine if every person in Nova Scotia had been looking for a specific blanket pattern or specific boot treads. Imagine if truck drivers, hikers, campers, and local residents had all been armed with detailed descriptions of what to look for. Instead, the public got generic descriptions and vague locations, while critical evidence remained locked away in police files. The community outrage was immediate and justified. Parents across Nova Scotia started asking terrifying questions. If this happened to my child, would they get the same treatment? Would investigators choose procedure over my baby's life? Child safety advocates were furious. They pointed out that the children's ages alone, 6 and 4, made them incredibly vulnerable. Add the possibility of neurodivergent conditions, and the risk level should have been astronomical. But here's what really happened. Bureaucratic protocol overruled common sense. The RCMP stuck to their criteria like it was religious doctrine, even when those criteria might have been costing precious time. Expert after expert weighed in, and their message was consistent. This was a massive failure of the system designed to protect children. Former RCMP investigator Mike Rodriguez, who worked missing persons cases for 20 years, didn't mince words. I've seen Amber Alerts issued for teenagers who ran away from home, but 2 vulnerable toddlers with physical evidence of their movement. That's exactly what the system was designed for. The real kick in the teeth. Later admissions from law enforcement officials that the criteria for Amber Alerts might require revision in cases where ambiguity leads to delays. That's bureaucrat speak for "we screwed up." If you're as outraged as I am about this decision, let me know in the comments. Should protocol ever override common sense when children's lives are at stake? But the delayed alert and withheld evidence wasn't just about following rules. It created a cascade of failures that affected every aspect of the investigation. Provincial and national law enforcement agencies that might have collaborated immediately were kept in the dark. Potential witnesses who could have provided crucial information never knew what to look for. Most importantly, it sent a message that would haunt this case. Procedure mattered more than results. Here's the life lesson every parent needs to understand. Never assume authorities will automatically use every available tool. As a parent or community member, you have the right to demand immediate action and transparency. If your child goes missing, don't just trust the system. Ask questions. Has an Amber Alert been issued? If not, why not? What evidence have you found, and how are you using it to find my child? What agencies are involved, and what resources are being deployed? The Sullivan case proves that blind trust can be deadly. The system failed Lilly and Jack in those crucial first hours, and that failure would cascade into every decision that followed. But the Amber Alert scandal was just the beginning, because while investigators were debating protocols, they were also making search decisions that would boggle the minds of every expert who reviewed this case. The second secret investigators don't want you to know will make you question everything you thought you understood about missing children searches. When Lilly and Jack Sullivan disappeared, the RCMP launched what they called a massive search operation. They deployed drones equipped with thermal imaging. They brought in helicopters with high-definition cameras. They used ground-penetrating radar to scan the dense Nova Scotia wilderness. Sounds impressive, right? State-of-the-art technology, modern methods, all the bells and whistles of 21st century search and rescue. But here's what they didn't use: cadaver dogs. Let me repeat that because it's so insane you might think you misheard. In a case involving 2 missing children, with physical evidence proving they had moved beyond their home, investigators chose not to bring in specially trained dogs that could have tracked their scent. Why is this absolutely mind-blowing? Cadaver dogs aren't just for finding bodies. That's a common misconception. These highly trained canines can detect human scent, track movement patterns, and identify areas of interest that human searchers might miss completely. In missing children cases, they've been responsible for countless rescues and recoveries. But in the Sullivan case, nowhere to be found in the initial search phases. The official explanation from investigators was that they saw no immediate indication of foul play, and therefore didn't believe canine units were necessary. They argued that the evidence suggested the children had simply wandered off, making technological searches more appropriate than scent-based tracking. Here's why that explanation is complete nonsense. Search and rescue expert Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who's coordinated hundreds of missing persons cases, put it perfectly. Cadaver dogs don't just find bodies, they find people. In wilderness areas, especially with young children, scent detection is often the difference between life and death. Technology is amazing, but it can't smell fear, track footsteps, or detect human presence the way a trained dog can. But it gets worse. Much worse. Whistleblower accounts from search and rescue volunteers revealed that certain areas of the forest were deemed low priority by senior officers, even though local knowledge suggested these areas were potential hotspots for human activity. One volunteer, speaking anonymously for fear of reprisal, described the frustration. "We kept requesting permission to search specific areas, old trails, hidden clearings, spots where kids might naturally go or where someone might take them. But we were told to stick to the designated search zones and follow the technology." Think about that. Local volunteers who knew the terrain, who understood how children might move through the wilderness, were being overruled by investigators who preferred to trust machines over human expertise. The leaked internal communications paint an even more disturbing picture. Anonymous sources provided emails showing that directives were sent to deprioritize certain leads and focus resources on areas identified by aerial surveillance. These communications suggest that the search wasn't as comprehensive as the public was told. It was carefully managed and deliberately limited. One particularly damning email, sent 3 days into the search, essentially told ground teams to avoid areas that hadn't been cleared by the technological survey first. In other words, if the drones and radar didn't detect something, human searchers weren't supposed to waste time looking there. But here's what every search and rescue professional knows. Technology has limitations. Dense forest canopy can block thermal imaging. Underground features can't be detected by aerial surveillance. Human scent can be masked by weather, terrain, and time. That's why the best searches combine everything: technology and traditional methods. Drones and dogs, radar, and human intuition. The Sullivan search used half the toolkit and wondered why it wasn't getting results. Meanwhile, critical evidence was being overlooked. Remember, investigators had already found Lilly's blanket fragment and Jack's boot print. These weren't random clues. They were concrete proof that the children had been in specific locations. Any search expert will tell you that these items should have been the starting point for comprehensive scent tracking. A trained cadaver dog could have followed the scent trail from those locations, could have identified other areas where the children had been, could have provided direction and focus for the human search teams. Instead, those clues were treated as isolated discoveries rather than roadmaps to finding the children. Independent forensic expert Dr. Michael Torres reviewed the search methodology, and his assessment was brutal. This wasn't a search, it was a technology demonstration. They relied so heavily on machines that they forgot the most basic principles of finding missing people. But the over-reliance on technology wasn't just ineffective, it was dangerous. While drones were scanning the forest canopy and radar was probing the ground, precious time was slipping away. Every hour that passed without comprehensive scent tracking was an hour when the trail grew colder. Search and rescue professionals have a term for this: technological tunnel vision. It's when investigators become so focused on high-tech solutions that they ignore proven methods that have saved lives for decades. The consequences were devastating. Volunteers later reported discovering additional evidence that had been missed by the initial technological sweep: tire tracks along seldom-used forest roads, scattered fragments that might have been additional personal belongings, areas where the ground showed signs of recent disturbance. All of this was found by human eyes, human intuition, and traditional search methods. None of it was detected by the high-tech equipment that investigators had prioritized. Even more frustrating, some of these discoveries were made in areas that volunteers had requested permission to search from day one, areas that had been labeled low priority by the technological assessment. The search operation that was supposed to be massive and comprehensive was actually limited and deliberately constrained. Resources were channeled into technological solutions, while proven methods were sidelined. Here's the life lesson every family needs to understand. When someone you love goes missing, demand a comprehensive search strategy that combines every available tool. Don't let investigators tell you that technology is enough. Don't accept explanations that some areas are low priority based on machine assessments alone. Ask the hard questions. Are you using cadaver dogs? If not, why not? What areas are you searching, and what areas are you avoiding? Are local volunteers and their terrain knowledge being incorporated into the search plan? What traditional search methods are being used alongside the technology? The Sullivan case proves that technology is powerful, But it's not magic. It can't replace the nose of a trained dog, the eyes of an experienced searcher, or the intuition of people who know the local terrain. But the search limitations were just one piece of a larger puzzle. While investigators were making questionable decisions about where to look and how to look, the media was constructing a narrative that would fundamentally alter the course of the investigation. And that narrative had a target. The third secret is perhaps the most insidious, because it shows how the media and investigators can work together, consciously or unconsciously, to manipulate public perception and derail the search for truth. From the moment the Sullivan case hit the news, one person became the focal point of suspicion, speculation, and scrutiny: Daniel Martel, the stepfather. Now I want to be crystal clear about something before we dive into this. Investigating family members in missing children cases is standard procedure, and it should be. Statistics show that most harm to children comes from people they know, often family members, so looking at the stepfather isn't inherently wrong. What's wrong is how that investigation became a media circus that may have derailed the search for these children. Within hours of Lilly and Jack's disappearance, news outlets were running stories that focused heavily on Martel. Headlines questioned his behavior. Articles speculated about inconsistencies in his statements. Television reports noted his cooperation with polygraph tests, but in a way that made that cooperation seem suspicious rather than helpful. Here's a real headline from the coverage: Stepfather undergoes polygraph in missing children case. What investigators found will shock you. Notice how that's phrased. It's not stepfather cooperates fully with investigation. It's written to suggest that something shocking was discovered, even when the polygraph results were never released, and no charges were filed. This kind of coverage became the pattern. Every aspect of Martel's life was scrutinized, analyzed, and presented in the most suspicious light possible. His emotional responses were questioned. If he seemed upset, it was suspicious behavior. If he seemed calm, it was cold detachment. But here's what makes this media focus so dangerous. It diverted attention from other critical aspects of the case. While news outlets were running endless speculation about the stepfather, they weren't investigating the delayed Amber Alert. They weren't questioning the search methodology. They weren't analyzing the evidence handling. They weren't demanding transparency about the investigation's decision. In other words, the media became complicit in creating a narrative that served the investigators' interests, whether intentionally or not. Think about it. If the public is focused on whether the stepfather is guilty, they're not asking why cadaver dogs weren't used. If the conversation is about his polygraph results, nobody's talking about the withheld evidence. If the story is about his suspicious behavior, the real issues with the investigation get buried. This is Media Manipulation 101. And it worked perfectly. Dr. Amanda Chen, who studies media coverage of criminal investigations, explains it this way. When you give the public a clear villain to focus on, they stop asking uncomfortable questions about institutional failures. It's much easier to blame one person than to examine systemic problems. But the media focus wasn't just about ratings and clicks, though it was definitely about that too. There's evidence that this narrative was being fed by the investigation itself. Anonymous sources within the RCMP later revealed that information about Martel was being selectively leaked to reporters. Details about his cooperation, his emotional state, his background, all of this was making its way to journalists in a way that painted him as suspicious without ever crossing the line into actual accusations. This is a classic law enforcement tactic. Let the media do your dirty work. Instead of officially naming someone as a suspect, which would require evidence and due process, you leak information that makes them look guilty in the court of public opinion. And it gets worse. Leaked internal communications show that while resources were being devoted to investigating every aspect of Martel's life, other leads were being deprioritized. The same emails I mentioned earlier, the ones about limiting search areas, also contain directives to focus investigative resources on the primary person of interest. What does that mean in plain English? While investigators were spending time and energy building a case against the stepfather, they were spending less time following up on other evidence, other possibilities, other potential suspects. Remember those tire tracks on forest roads I mentioned? Those got minimal follow-up because resources were focused elsewhere. The additional fabric fragments found by volunteers, not a priority because the investigation had already identified its preferred narrative. This is tunnel vision at its worst, and it's exactly what defense attorneys warn about in wrongful conviction cases. When investigators decide early on who they think is guilty, they start looking for evidence to support that theory instead of following the evidence wherever it leads. The public reaction was swift and predictable. Social media exploded with hashtags calling for Martel's arrest. Online vigilantes started digging into his background, his employment history, his relationships. Death threats were made. The family was essentially driven into hiding. But here's the thing, none of this helped find Lilly and Jack. In fact, it may have actively hindered the search. Potential witnesses who might have had information about other suspects or other possibilities were drowned out by the noise of speculation about the stepfather. Tips that didn't fit the preferred narrative were ignored or deprioritized. Child safety expert Dr. Michael Rodriguez put it perfectly: the best way to ensure you never find missing children is to decide early on who you think is responsible, and then only look for evidence that supports that theory. Have you ever seen a case where the media seemed to decide who was guilty before the investigation was complete? Share your thoughts below, because this pattern is more common than you might think. But the media manipulation went beyond just focusing on Martel. There was also a deliberate effort to downplay the investigative failures I've already described. When experts criticized the lack of Amber Alert, media coverage focused on protocol and proper procedures. When search and rescue professionals questioned the methodology, news stories emphasized the advanced technology being used. In other words, every criticism of the investigation was countered with official-sounding explanations that made the public feel like the experts were overreacting. This is textbook damage control. Instead of acknowledging mistakes and promising to do better, the response was to make critics look unreasonable and to make the public feel like everything was under control. The result: a case where the real issues, delayed alerts, limited searches, withheld evidence, were buried under layers of speculation about one individual's guilt or innocence. Here's the life lesson that could save your family. Never let media narratives substitute for critical thinking. When a missing children case becomes focused on one person, ask yourself, what questions aren't being asked? What aspects of the investigation aren't being scrutinized? Demand balanced coverage. Demand transparency. Demand that the focus remains on finding the children, not on creating compelling television. And remember, in the age of social media, we're all part of the media. What we share, what we amplify, what we focus on, all of that shapes the narrative and potentially the investigation. The Sullivan case shows us how dangerous it can be when media coverage becomes part of the problem instead of part of the solution. While everyone was debating Daniel Martel's guilt or innocence, the real secrets of this investigation were being buried deeper and deeper. But some people refused to let those secrets stay buried, and their revelations would expose the most disturbing aspects of this case. The fourth and final secret is the most explosive, and it's the one that transforms this case from a tragic disappearance into something far more sinister. What if I told you that there's evidence suggesting the investigation into Lilly and Jack Sullivan's disappearance may have been deliberately sabotaged from the inside? That whistleblowers, with direct knowledge of the case, believe critical evidence was suppressed, alternative theories were silenced, and the truth was buried to protect institutional interests. This is where the Sullivan case stops being about missing children and becomes about a system that may have failed them deliberately. Let me start with the alternative theories that never made it into mainstream coverage. While the public was fed a narrative about either tragic accident or family involvement, independent investigators were developing a very different picture, a picture that involved external abduction, organized crime connections, and evidence pointing to suspects who were never seriously investigated. Dr. Patricia Holmes, a retired FBI profiler who reviewed the case independently, didn't mince words. Everything about this case, the evidence pattern, the timing, the location, suggests organized abduction by someone with knowledge of the area and the family's routines. But that theory was never properly explored because it didn't fit the preferred narrative. What evidence supports this theory? First, the pattern of physical evidence. Lilly's blanket wasn't just dropped randomly, it was found in a location that suggested deliberate placement, almost like a breadcrumb trail leading away from the home. Jack's bootprint was discovered on a trail that required specific knowledge to access, not the kind of place young children would wander accidentally. Second, the timing. The children disappeared during a narrow window when they would have been unsupervised but still accessible. This suggests someone who knew the family's routine, who had been watching, who had planned. Third, the location itself. The areas where evidence was found were accessible by vehicle, but hidden from casual observation. Perfect for someone who needed to move quickly and quietly. But here's where it gets really disturbing. When independent investigators tried to explore these possibilities, they hit walls. Official sources refused to provide information. Evidence was deemed classified or part of ongoing investigation. Witnesses who might have seen suspicious vehicles or unfamiliar people in the area were never interviewed or their statements were dismissed. One retired detective, speaking under condition of anonymity, said, "I've worked hundreds of cases, and I've never seen such resistance to following obvious leads. It was like someone had decided what the answer was supposed to be, and anything that didn't fit was ignored." The whistleblower accounts paint an even more disturbing picture. Multiple sources within the investigation have come forward with claims that evidence was deliberately suppressed and alternative theories were shut down from above. The search and rescue volunteer I mentioned earlier provided more details about the areas that were deemed off-limits. According to this source, some of these areas showed clear signs of recent vehicle activity, tire tracks, disturbed vegetation, areas where it looked like something had been dragged. But when volunteers reported these findings, they were told to stick to assigned areas and leave the analysis to professionals. Even more damning, this volunteer claims that when they persisted in asking about these areas, they were removed from the search team entirely and told their services were no longer needed. Another whistleblower, claiming to be a law enforcement officer involved in the case, provided what appear to be internal emails showing deliberate decisions to limit investigative scope. One email, dated 3 days into the investigation, contained this line: "Focus remains on primary subject. External theories are not to be pursued without direct authorization from command." Translation: don't look at anyone except the stepfather unless the brass gives you permission. Another email, sent a week later, was even more explicit. "Media narrative is working. Public attention focused appropriately. Maintain current investigative priorities." Think about what that means. The media narrative, the focus on Daniel Martel, was described as working and something to be maintained. This suggests that the media focus wasn't accidental or organic. It was a deliberate strategy to control public attention. But the most explosive revelation came from a forensic technician who claims to have processed evidence from the scene. This source alleges that additional physical evidence was found but never disclosed publicly. Items that could have pointed to external suspects, DNA evidence that didn't match family members, trace evidence that suggested the children had been in locations not revealed to the public. According to this technician, when they asked supervisors about following up on these findings, they were told the evidence was inconclusive and not relevant to current investigative focus. In other words, evidence that didn't support the preferred narrative was dismissed or buried. Now I need to be clear about something important. These are allegations, claims made by people who say they have inside knowledge but can't prove it publicly without risking their careers or legal consequences. I can't verify every detail, and neither can you. But here's what we can verify. The pattern of behavior these whistleblowers describe is consistent with the documented failures in this case. The delayed alerts, the limited searches, the media manipulation, all of these fit with claims of deliberate misdirection and cover-up. And the motive is clear: institutional self-protection. Think about it from the perspective of the investigators and their superiors. If the Sullivan case was solved quickly and cleanly, it would be a success story. But if it dragged on with no resolution, questions would be asked. Resources would be scrutinized. Decisions would be second-guessed. But if you can control the narrative, if you can make the public believe that you're competently investigating an obvious suspect while the real evidence points elsewhere, then you can buy time and deflect criticism. The focus on Daniel Martel served multiple purposes. It satisfied public demand for action. It provided a clear storyline for media coverage, and it directed attention away from investigative failures and alternative possibilities. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the search and rescue expert I quoted earlier, put it bluntly: when an investigation becomes more focused on managing public perception than finding the truth, you know something is fundamentally broken. The broader implications are terrifying. If the whistleblower accounts are accurate, this case represents a complete breakdown of the systems designed to protect missing children, not just bureaucratic failures or poor decisions, but active suppression of evidence and deliberate misdirection of resources. And if it happened in the Sullivan case, how many other cases have been similarly compromised? How many families have been denied justice because the truth was inconvenient for institutional interests? This is why cases like this matter so much. This is why we can't just accept official explanations and move on. This is why demanding transparency and accountability isn't just about one family, it's about protecting all families. Advocacy groups and legal watchdogs have called for independent reviews of the Sullivan investigation. They want comprehensive audits of decision-making processes, full disclosure of all evidence, and open inquiry into the whistleblower claims. So far, these demands have been ignored or deflected. The official response has been that the investigation is ongoing and that revealing details would compromise the search for the children, but many experts believe this is just more of the same, using the children's welfare as an excuse to avoid accountability. The truth is out there, buried under layers of bureaucracy, politics, and institutional self-interest. The question is whether public pressure will be enough to uncover it, or whether the secrets of the Sullivan case will remain hidden forever. Here's what you can do. Stay informed, ask questions, demand transparency. Don't let this case fade from public attention. Don't accept easy answers or convenient narratives. Because somewhere, the truth about what happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan is waiting to be discovered. And that truth may reveal not just what happened to two innocent children, but how our institutions can fail the people they're sworn to protect. After diving deep into the 4 secrets of the Sullivan case, you might be feeling overwhelmed, angry, or maybe even hopeless. But here's why I shared this story with you. Not to make you lose faith in the system, but to give you the knowledge you need to protect your family when the system fails. The Sullivan case teaches us 5 critical life lessons that every parent, every community member, every person who cares about justice needs to understand. Lesson 1. Protocol versus common sense. Never accept we're following procedure as an excuse when lives are at stake. The Amber Alert delay shows us how bureaucratic rules can become barriers to saving lives. If your child goes missing, don't be polite. Don't trust that authorities know best. Ask hard questions. Why hasn't an Amber Alert been issued? What criteria aren't being met, and how can we meet them? Make noise, make demands, make them justify every decision. Remember, procedures are created by humans, and humans make mistakes. When those mistakes could cost your child's life, you have every right to challenge them. Lesson 2. Question authority. The search limitations in the Sullivan case prove that expertise doesn't always equal competence. When investigators chose technology over proven methods like cadaver dogs, they made a choice that may have cost precious time. Demand transparency about search strategies. Ask what methods are being used and what methods aren't. If something doesn't make sense, say so. You're not being difficult. You're being a responsible advocate for your missing loved one. Lesson 3. Media literacy in crisis. The focus on Daniel Martel shows how media narratives can hijack investigations. When coverage becomes more about creating villains than finding truth, everyone loses. Don't let media speculation substitute for critical thinking. Ask yourself, what questions aren't being asked? What aspects of the case aren't getting attention? Share information that focuses on finding the missing person, not on creating drama. Lesson 4. The power of public pressure. The whistleblower accounts and alternative theories in the Sullivan case only emerged because people refused to accept the official narrative. Public pressure forced uncomfortable questions and kept the case alive, when authorities might have preferred it fade away. Stay engaged. Stay vocal. Don't let cases disappear from public attention just because they're not getting results. Sometimes the only thing standing between truth and cover-up is citizens who refuse to stop caring. Lesson 5. Community action works. Throughout the Sullivan case, volunteers and community members consistently outperformed official efforts. They found evidence that was missed. They asked questions that needed asking. They refused to give up when the system failed. Build networks in your community. Know your neighbors. Create support systems that don't depend on official institutions. When crisis strikes, you may find that your community is more reliable than the authorities. But knowledge without action is worthless. Here's what you need to know to protect your family. If your child goes missing, demand immediate action. Don't wait for authorities to decide if your case meets their criteria. Every minute matters. Ask specific questions. What search methods are you using? What areas are you covering? What evidence have you found? Don't accept vague answers. Document everything. Keep records of what authorities tell you, what actions they take, what decisions they make. This creates accountability. Mobilize your community. Don't rely solely on official search efforts. Organize volunteers, distribute information, use social media effectively. Stay media savvy. Control your narrative. Don't let media speculation derail the search for your child. The ongoing fight. The Sullivan case isn't over. Lilly and Jack are still missing. The questions still demand answers. The secrets still need to be exposed. But this case has already accomplished something important. It's shown us how the system can fail and what we need to do to protect ourselves and our families. This case proves that we can't blindly trust institutions to protect our most vulnerable. If you believe families deserve better, if you think these children deserve justice, if you want to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem, then I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to True Crime Seat and help us keep shining light on the cases that matter. Your voice matters, and together we can demand accountability. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and share this video with everyone who needs to hear this message. Because the next family facing crisis could be yours. The next missing child could be someone you love. And when that moment comes, you'll be grateful you learned these lessons before you needed them. We're not just telling stories here, we're building a community of people who refuse to accept good enough when lives are at stake. The authorities failed Lilly and Jack Sullivan. The media failed them. The system failed them. But we don't have to fail them. We can keep their story alive. We can keep demanding answers. We can keep fighting for the truth. And maybe, just maybe, we can prevent the next family from going through what the Sullivans have endured. As I wrap up this investigation into the 4 secrets of the Sullivan case, I want you to understand something crucial. This isn't just about 2 missing children in Nova Scotia. This is about all of us. The Sullivan case is a mirror that reflects the failures of systems we trust with our most precious possessions, our children. Today, Lilly and Jack Sullivan remain missing. Their family continues to live in the agony of not knowing. Their community continues to search for answers that may never come. But their story has revealed something that demanded to be revealed. How quickly our institutions can fail us when we need them most. How bureaucracy can become a barrier to justice. How media narratives can obscure truth. How the people sworn to protect us can sometimes protect themselves instead. Every secret we've uncovered today, from the delayed Amber Alert to the limited search strategies, from the media manipulation to the alleged cover-up, represents a choice. Someone chose procedure over urgency. Someone chose technology over proven methods. Someone chose narrative control over transparent investigation. These weren't accidents. They were decisions made by people who prioritized other things over finding 2 missing children. And those decisions have consequences that extend far beyond Nova Scotia. They've created a precedent. They've shown other investigators that these choices are acceptable. They've demonstrated to other families that this is the level of service they can expect in their darkest hours. That's unacceptable. But here's what gives me hope. The truth has a way of emerging, even when powerful forces try to bury it. The whistleblowers who risked their careers to speak out. The volunteers who refused to stop searching. The experts who wouldn't stop asking uncomfortable questions. The community members who demanded better. All of these voices together created enough pressure to expose the secrets we've discussed today. They proved that ordinary people, working together, can hold institutions accountable, even when those institutions would prefer to avoid scrutiny. The Sullivan case isn't over. The fight for truth continues, and your voice is part of that fight. Every time you share this story, you're keeping Lilly and Jack's case alive. Every time you ask hard questions about missing children cases in your community, you're demanding better. Every time you refuse to accept that's just how things work. As an answer, you're making change possible. Sometimes the most important crime stories aren't just about what happened, they're about what didn't happen, what was overlooked, and what was deliberately hidden. The Sullivan case reminds us that our trust must be earned, not assumed, that our safety depends on our vigilance, not just on official promises, that our children's protection requires our active participation, not just our passive faith in the system. The 4 secrets we've revealed today aren't just about one case. They're about a pattern of behavior that puts every family at risk. But now you know. Now you're prepared. Now you understand what questions to ask, what red flags to watch for, what standards to demand, and that knowledge could save lives. Maybe even the life of someone you love. The legacy of Lilly and Jack Sullivan doesn't have to be just tragedy and unanswered questions. It can be change. It can be reform. It can be a wake-up call that forces our institutions to do better, but only if we refuse to let their story be forgotten. Only if we keep demanding answers. Only if we transform our outrage into action and our knowledge into power. The secrets are out. The truth is emerging. The fight continues, and you're part of it now. Don't let this be just another true crime story you watched and forgot. Make it the moment you decided to demand better, for yourself, for your family, for every child who deserves protection. The truth about Lilly and Jack Sullivan is still out there, waiting to be fully uncovered. Help us find it. Stay vigilant. Keep questioning. Never stop fighting for justice. Because in the end, the only thing standing between our children and the failures of the system is us.